Welcome back to Supply Chain Africa News. And we were talking about supply chain, the professionalization of supply chain. So we decided before we talk about professionalization, we want you to understand where did it begin. And we had Mr. Michael's experience. Now we are bringing in Mr. Wakaria to tell us his experience, how it was.
Well, I think mine was a bit easier because things were already in place. But the biggest challenge was to look at the supply chain from a holistic perspective. You know, when you talk about supply chain management, look at your organization in the middle. On the upstream, you have a supplier and you have a customer on this side. So as a supply chain professional, you have to look at all those things because goods will be going downstream, information will be going from downstream, upstream, and cash will be coming back from the customer. So even if you're dealing with logistics, even if you're dealing with procurement, you need to look at it, that whole chain. And I think supply chain management is not a very old discipline per se. I mean, my friend here talked about purchasing, where you are insourcing goods. We moved from purchasing to logistics management. You are moving goods from one location to the other. But now we are at that level where we are saying it is supply chain management, looking at the entire chain. So when I came into supply chain, my whole idea was to help the supply chain profession to see it from that broader perspective. So I worked with the Ministry of Health personnel. Their work was basically inventory management. You know, the drugs have come to my store. How do I issue those to the patient? How do you make sure that they don't expire? But you see, that chain is linked. So my work was to say, okay, you have the goods here, but you also need to look at the upstream. How do you make your orders? How do you quantify how much you need for a certain period of time, and how again do you use the information that you have in your stores to inform decision? How do you do demand planning? How do you do supply planning? So it's sort of increasing their technical capabilities in that perspective. So my experience was more on training staff on supply chain management, mentoring them to make sure that we have good practices, but also, you know, sort of showing them that broader perspective.
Mr. Ngesa, looking at it from accountability perspective, if the executive officer is the one who dictates and makes the orders of everything, do you think there was accountability at that time?
There wasn't, and that's why now, when I was talking about the Public Procurement Asset and Disposal Act 2015, that now brought in those things of accountability. Okay. You may want to argue that how come then we are still having problems today? But the problem
that was actually my next question.
Yeah.
Should I ask or you answer it?
The problem is not the law, but the people who are implementing the law. Yeah. So we have all this. Accountability is one of the guiding principles of procurement. You see, accountability, transparency, economy. Those are some of the principles. But people choose not to do it because of many reasons. Most of us understand. Yeah, some are institutional gaps, due to institutional gaps, leadership gaps, and so those are some of the issues.
And I think perhaps, or to add on to what or my brother is talking about, there is the aspect of integrity. That integrity also needs to be in the person handling, those activities, so that there can be accountability. And integrity is not just the person responsible for, facilitating the acquisition of those services, but also the leadership. They need to, operate above board. If, for example, they, influence your decision making and what have you, then that brings in the aspect of non-accountability and those kind of aspects.
So what you're trying to say is, it all depends on personal integrity.
Personal integrity, particularly when you are in supply chain or management, is critical because it borders on ethics as well. And if you are not ethical in operations, then obviously, the operations will be impaired because there's a lot of honesty and trust that is bestowed on you by the customers, by, the organization you're working for, by the outside, upstream, suppliers like my brother here was talking about. So the entire chain depends on your integrity.
Mr. Wakaria, our main topic is professionalization. Most people probably they're asking themselves, what is professionalization?
Good. I think when you look at professionalization, three aspects comes into mind. First is you want to use the skills, the core competency of a person to transform him or her from a worker to a profession. You also want to transform an occupation to a profession. So when you talk about supply chain professionalization, we are talking about the process of using the skills, the competency to transform or to help this person have those in them to be able to be fully operational for the supply chain to succeed. And supply chain professionalization, you require different, I would call them different levels of skills for you to be to help in terms of making sure that they have maximum output. You require functional supply chain skills. You require technical supply chain skills. You require leadership supply chain skills. You also require issues of ethics and integrity. So when you put all that together, then you are professionalizing that discipline. That's how I'd look at it.
Okay. Mr. Ngesa, if I'll come to you. What will it benefit me as a common mwananchi if you professionalize supply chain?
Yeah, so it's very, very important what is mentioned. You know, he's mentioned standards, he's mentioned ethics, he's mentioned competency. So once now we achieve those objectives within the individual who is performing them, because you are performing an activity based on those standards, based on ethics, based on training, based on education, based on skills, you are now able to bring out an output that can be measured, okay? An output that can influence, okay? And when I'm talking about influence here, now we start looking at sectors, okay? For example, if this individual is talking about who is now been professionalized through the training, is working for health, how is that profession impacting on the health outcomes? And that's why we are professionalizing these things. So that does this individual have in mind the end product of his process or of his output? Is when the patient gets healed, does he know or she know the part or role he or she has played in making that person go home smiling? That's now why we are professionalizing this. If, for example, I'm like now I'm working for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation under the SIPS. I'm more interested in strengthening health system, supply chain systems to ensure that the health outcomes are what result in the ordinary mwananchi getting the services they require. And that's the function of governments, for example, to make sure that services are delivered. But these services are delivered because we have procurement and supply chain happening for the services to be delivered. And that's why professionalism now brings in efficiency, effectiveness, that impact. Yeah? And that's the mindset we are trying to build in the profession, in the professional, so that if the government is talking about Vision 2030, how does procurement come in? How do you influence the achievement of these national goals, okay? Of your organizational goals, okay? Other than the individual goals, okay? And that's why we are trying to make sure that the professionals we are bringing up today have that mindset, that I'm doing this not to earn money for myself, but to influence the way service delivery at whatever point I'm working.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Michael, when they talk about professionalization of supply chain, what's this new thing that they are going to bring on board that has been missing? If we talk about integrity, it has been talked about, but still, it's still missing in the system.
You see, like Mr. Wakaria has mentioned here, that what we are looking at now is strengthening the profession so that service delivery, like my brother did mention, is actually made to be seen to be actually taking place. Because what we are talking about here is coming up with a framework of core competencies, core skills that we need. And I remember you asking, my brother here, how would you as an individual benefit? And I want to bring it a little home. Bring it home by saying that, assuming you are a diabetic patient, for example, and the governmental organization responsible for, quantifying, the pharmaceutical products that need to be procured in this country, does not know what it means or how to quantify, come up with enough quantities for all patients to cover the 45, are we 45 million or 43 population? Put it at 50. Yeah. Now we want to ensure that we come up with quantities that will provide for drug supply in this country for every patient, such that when they go to the chemist out there to ask for that particular drug, it will be available. It is as a result of supply chain competence, a competent person in supply chain who was able to sit down and quantify the quantities that would be able to supply the country comes in. So that is how you as an individual would benefit. Point number one. Number two, let us assume you have traveled to Wajir, Garissa there, and you are thirsty. You go to an outlet. You ask them, do you have Fanta? It should be available. The key point here is that commodity needs to be available at the time it is required, in the right quantity and at the right price. So now all these factors are, basically can only come into play and realized when now we have competent personnel who have those kind of skills that are required, who have the ability to do the job, rightly, and are not influenced in the decision making, which would have an impact on the price. You see what I mean?
Yes.
So if they are influenced in their decision making, for example, let us assume we have vendor A here and vendor B and vendor D. And in my decision making process, I feel that this procurement should actually go to vendor B. And because you are my supervisor, my director, you tell me, let us go to vendor C. This would have an impact, spiral effect to the consumer. Now, the supply chain aspect that Mr. Okere was talking about here, forward planning. You need to plan with the upstream to be able to know, do they have those commodities available out there? How much time will it take for it to be brought into the country so that it can be in the outlets? All these require skills in supply chain for you to be able to get the benefit down there. You may not realize it, but when there's broken supply chain, you go to the supermarket, there will be the issue of stock out that my brother was talking about here, which actually made him feel that perhaps he needs to come into the profession to bring out, to kind of bridge that gap.
Of course, I want to ask him if he has bridged that gap.
I think we are not yet there. When we talk about, I think just picking from him in terms of professionalization, what will the common man benefit from it? So once you have a professional supply chain, you have quality workforce. And when you have quality workforce, you increase the service delivery, right? So if I go to the shop, I get the right product, I get it at the right quantity, I get it at the right price, and I get it at the right place. So that means that the service level ratio increases. But also not that. You also get confidence and trust from the public. Look at the COVID situation that we are facing in the country, the vaccines. If the supply chain is broken and I go to a hospital and the vaccine is not available, then the government loses confidence and trust from the population. So even if they bring another advanced technology, we still have that memory that I didn't get the vaccine, that it's not there. Now, there's still a lot to be done in terms of professionalization. We haven't bridged the gap. I think what is missing is a comprehensive supply chain management framework. And in this framework, there needs to be different players in it. The employers need to be there, to define the core competencies that they require for their supply chain professionals. The government needs to be on board to define the standards that are required and the code of conduct. The professional bodies like KISIM needs to be there, to regulate the profession. But also us as supply chain profession, we need also to be in that framework so that we define the career path. So when you bring all these bodies together and you come up with a comprehensive framework, then it can greatly improve in terms of professionalization.
Mr. Ngesa, if I may ask you this question. Probably most people will argue that all these directives have been there to promote professionalization, but still what we are getting, it's not what we anticipated for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good question. And if you remember, I mentioned earlier that some of the problems we have are institutional related, because we have a very good constitution with a very great chapter 6, which talks about integrity and how we should behave. We have Article 10 of the Constitution, which talks about values. So it's about our individual and professional standards that we set that actually define the way we are supposed to run our institutions. Yeah, because I don't want to be overzealous, but I would also say that the way we appoint, for example, the public sector, the way we appoint our leaders also has some direct effect on the way the institutions fail to work or work well. Okay? So when you hear about this noise about things not working well, it's not lack of laws. And I must say that Kenya, I think we've done so well in terms of training supply chain management professionals. We have a lot of them. I'm an examiner. I've taught in the universities. Maybe I didn't mention that. We are churning out a lot of people. But you see, because of lack of career counseling and that professional mindset, even the students who are coming out have a different view of why they are doing what they are doing.
Okay.
One day I asked a student why they are doing procurement courses, and he told me to make money.
Yeah.
Then I asked the student how, and she confidently or unknowingly told me that when a supplier supplies something and I do well, he scratches my back.
But the truth is, your profession is a 10% profession. Do you agree?
Okay. I mean, you see, this is the unfortunate situation. In as much as you might be really operating above board, people out there have that notion that you will always be induced in order to do what you need to do. But ideally, that should not be the case. That concept of 10%, I want to believe, was propagated and actually even made to be to appear to be the case by the or supply chain experts, trained people who knew what ethics is because they could get away with it. But at the moment where we have institutions like Kenya Institute of Supplies Management, which has to license you to operate in the country, if you are involved in corruptive practices like that, they can withdraw your certificate. And when they withdraw your certificate, what does that mean? It means you cannot be hired.
But Mr. Michael, to cut you short, these things are happening. The truth is they are happening.
No, okay, you might say that they are happening, but you realize the fact that it is unethical. It shouldn't indeed happen. So anybody doing it is doing it at their own peril. That is point number one. And that is why we need that framework and the mindset so that people are actually told. There are police officers out here whom even in as much as you will try to induce them with a bribe, they will not take it. If you've broken the law, you've broken the law. So don't push me to the wall to say that, yes, it is true, it's happening. The fact that it is happening doesn't make it legal, does it?
It doesn't.
It doesn't. So that's the point.
Just to add on what Mark is saying, that's why we're here discussing this subject here, to change the narrative. Yeah, that as much as this is happening, a majority of us are not doing it. Okay? So we are here to change that narrative, to change the perception. And that's why what professionalization is all about. Okay. We are changing the perception that procurement is a kitu kidogo, a 10% profession. Yeah. Okay? Yes. And that's how you guys view us. But let me tell you, there's a lot of work, good work happening out there. Yeah. Otherwise, this economy would have collapsed a long time ago. Let me tell you. Yeah. So we are here to make sure that people know that we now have even the laws in place, and KSM, I must say, are doing a lot of work towards this this initiative, because now I've been involved in so many of these.
Hold on that thought. I want us to take a short commercial break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about what the Kenya Institute of Supplies Management is doing to promote professionalization of supply chain, because I know you are the examiner there, right?